Our next speaker is,
His uncle.
yes, my Uncle Chris. Professor Chris Cieszewski, PhD, teaches biometric forestry and forest imaging, forest modeling at the University of Georgia in Athens. He earned his PhD from the University of Alberta, his MA or MSc rather from the University of Forest of British Columbia. He's been a researcher with a number of outfits, including the Warren School of Forest Resources. And he was a member of Center for Forest Business, etc. A senior consultant. I'm sorry, you sent me this to teach me how important you are, so I'm trying to kiss up to you and inform everybody. I know people start falling asleep already when I read your titles. And I appreciate that, but I really admire you, so I want to continue praising you because this is just a short vitae. Dr. Cieszewski will talk to us about Smolensk. However, I asked him to focus on his personal history. Namely, he is a victim of active measures. Aktywnie мероприятия are Soviet and Russian parlance for dirty tricks, monkey business. He was asked as an expert in biometric forestry to opine on the presidential plane crash in Smolensk. And he said, well, I smell rat. For instance, a birch tree cannot possibly slice off the wings of a plane because of the material used. So he made a joke, he quipped, unless it's an armored birch tree. And that was the beginning of the end for his career. He got in huge trouble on a variety of levels. He'll tell you all about it. Yes. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the nice introduction. Just as a disclaimer at the beginning, I'm not a monkey. So that business didn't quite relate to me, but yes, indeed. I know, that's a joke. So just to maybe give you a little background, since I was getting different questions from different people about what does a forester do with Smolensk investigation, for example, and how did I end up with it, and is it true that I'm Marek's uncle? How close uncle am I? And things like that. And after explanation was, no wonder you got into the Smolensk thing, if you're really uncle of Marek. Well, basically the history is a little different. Yes, I am uncle of his, very close as it gets. My father had a sister. She had a son, that's his father. Then with the Smolensk investigation, the story was that I was visiting Poland. I was actually giving workshops at the Agriculture University in Warsaw in 2012, and just out of curiosity, I was asking different people about what they thought about Smolensk, about that catastrophe. And I was very, in a short, pretty much in a short order, I became very discomforted by sort of uniformity of the answers, which were very unsatisfactory, because I was hearing from people things like it's a pilot error, and when I was saying, well, what about all that disinformation for attempts to land and things like that that were refuted later and so on. What about that the Russians don't give back the wreck of the plane and all the other things. And the people would tell me something that with a straight face, people that I know to be very intelligent and well educated, would tell me with a straight face and a little bit mysterious smile that, well, Russians do that so that Polish people fight with each other. Well, since I heard it from people that I knew that were very intelligent, I was even more disturbed because that's a kind of answer competing for a impact between a retard in a mental institution. And anybody who settles for this kind of explanation clearly doesn't want to know the truth and didn't try to get into the bottom of anything in that kind of investigation. So I was asking different people, and then finally I ran into a longtime friend of mine, Professor Witakowski, whom I was working in the underground doing the martial law, and who in fact was pretty much a direct reason why I had to flee the country. Because he was he was one of my contacts up in the production of Vola, which is a name of a underground paper. And he didn't want to tell me straight answer either. He was kind of saying, "What do you think?" and what this and so on. And finally, after a long struggle, he kind of opened himself, which suggested that he didn't trust me either at first. And he told me about the Smolensk conference and asked me about what I was thinking about it. And asked me about a favor. He said that they need somebody who would be having a reasonably good recognizable position in wood-related sciences. So forestry for him was that kind of profession. And he asked me about analyzing the finding out parameters of a sample of wood that came from the birch, Bodin's birch or Smolensk birch that is called. That was that was taken by a retired journalist, Jan Gruszyński, Dr. Jan Gruszyński, who smuggled that from Russia to Poland, and it was in their sort of exclusive possession. And so they asked me about taking it to the United States and analyzing and coming up with those parameters that were important for the investigation of another scientist who was Wiesław Binienda, Professor Binienda. And my reaction to that was that this is really a basic stuff. It's not really my cup of tea. It's not really what I do. And I explain what to do, and I will explain to you what I do also, so that you have a better understanding of where I'm coming from with what I'm doing. When I say, and until not long time ago, even Marek was saying it, that I'm a forester, that is more ambiguous than not telling anybody anything about where I'm from or do at all, because forester for most people, it's kind of associated with a image of a person walking in the forest with a double barrow and looking for a rabbit to shoot. And this is not what the foresters nowadays do, and it's not what I do. And by that I mean I am not in the mainstream of the forest sciences, and the mainstream of forest sciences is not what it traditionally used to be. So when you hear about a historian or a linguist or whatever, they you know exactly what they do. Foresters nowadays deal with mostly computers, data, satellites, imagery. There are some who are on the ground, but they're on the ground not to walk on the forest, but to take samples, statistical samples, and evidence from, the measurements from the forestry or of a type of 1/20th of an acre per 6,000 acres in order to find out what is there in the forest. So it's pretty high level of statistics. The only thing that is maybe more kind of tricky, it's say fishery where you actually cannot even count the fish without killing it. So anyhow, the field that I mean is called fiber supply assessment. And by the way, I don't teach. I'm 100% research, which is kind of 1% of the professors in at the University of Georgia are 100% research. General is 50% didactics, 50% research. Others are maybe 100% extension, and some are 50% extension, 50% didactics. So anyhow, I'm a sort of evenement there. I don't do teaching. I do only research, and my expectations towards me in terms of research are much higher than in general from the faculty members. Now, my area is called fiber supply assessment, and that's as meaningful as it gets. Fiber means basically a generic term for the tree material, for wood. It consists of fibers. It consists of three areas: large area inventory assessment, which essentially it's based on analyzing satellite imagery and using statistical samples, data. I never see forests, I never go to forests, I never see trees, I work only with numbers. Satellite imagery, unlike what many people think, are not pictures. They're basically matrices of data, typically cubes of data, multidimensional matrices of data. Growth and yield, it's a, so the first is to find out what's there from remote sensing and from statistics and mathematics. Then there's a growth and yield modeling, which essentially it's modeling and defining rules of changes over time. And that requires mathematics, statistics, and computing science. And then the third one is sustainability analysis and simulations for analyzing what's going to change over, say, Georgia, the 26 million acres of forest, if depending on what kind of regulations we could have in terms of what you can and cannot do with the forest. So like you see, I have nothing to do with forestry as is understood by laymen. I'm basically working with numbers, computers, mathematics, and remote sensing, satellite imagery, and things like that. So when I was asked about doing the wood quality assessment, my reaction was that there is really not much to do there. You just look up the tables and you find out what it is. Well, Professor Witakowski explained to me that that was not about really wanting to know what it is, but it was about finding out the number that can be shown to the public, because the media, it's pressing that every peasant knows that birch is strong and so on, and that's what they're up against. So I was this kind of frontman that was supposed to say, no, this is exactly that number. Well, I did the analysis, we really analyzed the heck out of this data. We ordered top of the line, state-of-the-art analysis, Sylviscan and spectrometry and so on, paid a fair amount of money for it, and got one of the two top laboratories in the world hired to actually analyze it with a precision of 25 microns. We got 10,500 measurements out of that small little branch of this thing. Came up with models and everything. And well, it was not very exciting, because the final product was that this birch was made of birch wood, and that was a sort of disappointment. It was supposed to be made of titanium or something to break that plane. But that's that was just the beginning. My kind of comment on that conference was that, well, first of all, they should be in English. They should open that to the world and have it published. And that kind of I was invited to actually introduce this element of it. So I created a conference website and in English website. And then the second one was that they had physicists and mathematicians basically kind of looking at this whole different elements and analyzing different things and so on. And my kind of look at it was that if I see something like that happening somewhere, the first I want to do is look from a kind of vibrant and from a bird's eye view, what is there from the satellite, what the satellite imagery could show that is there. And that was a shock for everybody, because they were under kind of, they were convinced that there were no satellite imagery. Apparently the press convinced everybody that there was no satellite imagery available at this time, because satellites, I don't know, took a break at that time or whatever. So we looked around and I found a bunch of pictures there, a bunch of satellite images, and added to it. So I basically kind of went into on the first conference with a couple of presentations. One that birch is made of birch wood, and the second is that second was that from the satellite imagery, it looked as a sort of inconsistent with the expectations. Well, I have background in engineering. Forest engineering consists of civil engineering, mechanical engineering, anything from cable mechanics to machine building and things like that. So I'm pretty versed in understanding of what things should look like in terms of mechanics expectations and material strength and so on. And what I presented on the first conference, I'll show here quickly. Well, so I'm not going to go through the presentation, just show you a kind of in the overview of the slides. Basically, maybe pointer. What you see is the second slide. It's a literature review on thin-walled structures. And thin-walled structures is what planes are. Basically, the kind of structures that have, instead of skeleton inside holding something, they have actually outside shell kind of holding things. And so a plane, anything from cars, planes, tubes, pipes, and so on, you can consider these are thin-walled structures. And that's how they get destructed. They get bent, they get caved, they kind of bend and warp and deform themselves, but they do not explode into pieces. And there was like tens of thousands of different pieces there that just didn't look like it was a crash, but it was that it didn't look like the plane could have possibly fallen on the ground and disintegrate, but rather looked like it disintegrated, and that's why it fell on the ground. So second thing that I noticed there, which was a kind of a coincidence, was that there was almost no snow there on the 5th, and yet we had several very prominent snow patches, and there. And that these snow patches, coincidentally, were overlapping with that debris. So you see a number of ellipsoids there. They're kind of showing where they are, and you can see that 5 days earlier there was a snow only, like almost snow was almost gone, but there was some snow there where the pieces fell off the plane, and it kind of I guess half serious, half not. I was asking a question: what was in the snow so that it attracted aluminum? And there was later, when I came to the second conference, I looked a little closer into that, and I found some other things. There was that already in the first one, I noticed that after that snow, there was no wet ground. Wet ground would be recognized as a dark spots, higher reflectivity, and after that snow, it didn't melt. So if there were some huge fire and so on, then I could see how that would maybe evaporate the water and so on, but it wasn't. So on the second conference, which already was past that wood quality issue, I started looking at certain things, kind of had a uncomfortable feeling that there were some loose ends in the whole investigation. So I looked both into that wood issues and into the snow patches. So then with the birch, it started. First of all, when I looked into that snow patches, I actually closed it accidentally too early. I found out also that when I looked into historical imagery from that region, there was historically never snow on that places. So in fact, there were some years that everything was completely covered with snow, but there were the patches where actually there was no snow, and possibly because it was kind of on the lined up with the landing strip, so the planes were going low there and could have been melting it or whatnot. So that was, I reported that, and that was a potentially the biggest kind of news. Actually, it gives me creeps thinking about it, that it was something so prominent, so visible, was not investigated when something like that happened. And some group of people, particularly those who were associated with so-called Maskirovka theory, they picked up on it big time, and they felt that was basically proof of that it was all assassination stage and so on, things like that. Well, for me, while it might be a proof that there was some kind of coincidental or deliberate correlation or some kind of association one with the other, that is not a proof of Maskirovka. So I kind of disassociated myself with those groups. But I must say, well, some of them are very intelligent people, and I don't have quandary with. I just don't agree with their theory, but I don't have quandary with these people. So interestingly, though, while this is really kind of earth-shaking finding, because potentially the implications of it are really creepy, there was total silence in the media and with everything. Nobody picked up on it, and beside those people that are kind of outcasts, and nobody wants to associate with them, which is that group of associated with Maskirovka. So then there is the tree story, and the tree story, in a short here you probably read it already. Basically, that the whole thing about that tree is that it is impossible, and Professor Binienda proved it, that it was impossible from the science point of view and from the engineering point of view that that tree could have broken off the wing. In addition to it, it's also inconsistent even with the eyewitnesses. There is Bodin himself was saying that the wing was not broken, that it fell off later. Well, if it didn't, then the tree should have been cut off. It wasn't. So and there were some other testimonies, and so the whole thing it just basically looked like it was not making sense from a great many points of view, great many arguments. And what happened is that then looking at that tree species and at the season of the year and the physiology of this and the characteristics of the break and so on, basically it was evident that the tree could not have been broken on April 10 to 10. It had to be broken before it, possibly substantially before, but how long before, I'm not sure. But now I'm gonna go over it, what it was. This is kind of like a preview of what's coming, the coming program. So this is the tree. That's on the left side you have superimposed satellite imagery with a paraglide picture taken from by a paraglide for a movie that is available on YouTube. On the right hand side you just have a picture of that tree with the mass. This is what allegedly was supposed to happen, which is a about 40-foot wide aircraft going with a speed of 80 meters per second. So that means the contact with the tree was about 5,000ths of a second, 5 milliseconds. Then, so it's like, almost like a bullet hit it, which has serious implications, because you would then expect various things like shattered wood rather than broken wood, and that you would have a various characteristics to the dynamic contact of it. And the plane was supposed to be on the 5 meters height. There is a shed there, about 3 by 15 meters little shed that you see on the right hand side that would be almost touched by it. The plane going that low probably would blow it away, because that's 3 engines pushing 80-ton plane with a speed of 80 meters per second. I mean, that's a tremendous blow. This kind of blow can fall over a car, and there are actually examples on the YouTube and on the web of cars being blown over by it, by airplanes' engines. Well, the major thing was, though, lack of sap. The species is a silver birch, and it's Betula pendula. It's a species that is very well known, very well studied. It's typical for infringement on post-agricultural lands. It produces tremendous amount of juices, of sap, that is collected, and in fact, there in that region, the local people were collecting it even at that time. Then, in addition to it, if you look at the characteristics of the break, the big splinter right there that actually matches extraction from the main stem. Here's an extraction of a knot. I did a lot of woodworking and carpentry, and I used like air guns. They shoot the nails a little bit slower than the plane was going, but when they shoot through the knot, typically they would shatter the knot. They never just extract it. Extraction of a knot, clean way, following the fibers and having this kind of clean extraction from it. It's atypical for breaking from bending, not from shattering, not from cutting, not for dynamic contact like that. What you see also, it's a little fibers in different place, tiny fiber. Why is that important? Well, the jet engines create a biblow zone to 50 meters long with to 500 degrees temperature. So one possible kind of theory would be if the temperature really high and that got kind of burned through after breaking, during the breaking, maybe that would somehow seal the cells of the tree or whatever. That's really far-fetched, but clearly didn't happen. That's another tree that was apparently broken by the train. It shows clear discharge of the sap. Then while the birch that was broken was completely air dried, so-called, which means it was exposed to the air for a long time before the vegetation period started. Here we can see that it's started. And here is even better thing because this is from their local Russian newspaper. Both of these pictures I'm from it. There was a picture taken about 3 days after or so. It shows, and that was an article that was actually having title saying that the broken trees are crying over the tragedy. So clearly the juices were going, the birches were bleeding, the region season was all in session, and clearly that tree must have had juices. Now, make no mistake about it, every tree is bleeding when it gets cut. But the birch, silver birch, Betula pendula, has a violent discharge of the juices. And what you see on the left side is an example which you could expect from it. So basically, based on that, it was pretty much clear that that tree could not possibly be broken, cut, damaged, or whatever open on the 10th of April. And then the other things, the shutter off, the mechanical brakes, the wood properties, and so on, all that together was clear. So, well, next thing was like, let's see if we can see on the satellite imager whether that can support that, whether the satellite imager can show it. If it didn't show it, that would still not change the conclusion. But if it were, it would be a nice thing to have, and that's what we did. So we used the from satellite was difficult. And by the way, at that time when we were doing this analysis, there were like 3 different locations of the tree published. One was Wikipedia's very far. One was Russian report. One was Polish report. They all were different, contradicting each other, and they all were showing at the wrong locations on that. So using that different pictures from both from the paraglide and from ground photography that was available, and having some additional measurements of that cross that was there. Well, we established how far it was from the shed. You see that's the same picture like in the inverse, which is a kind of negative from the digital pictures. It's better visible. Where is the edge of the roof? And we found out more or less where it was, and create a sort of template that was supposed to be matching it with the shed that was available and that was standing next to that tree. Well, the shed was not completely visible, so it was a kind of iterative process because that whole template of that shed had to be actually created on the satellite imagery, while this here corner we have before from the paraglide. So it was basically kind of simultaneous process of reiterating, finding to match it. Well, in order to find it, then again, we have a half a meter resolution satellite imagery. So using it's a kind of object-oriented image analysis approach, which is basically that you define what the object is that you're looking for, and then you define the region within you look for it. We did the pixelization of the pictures, and you see that what on the bottom on the right side is what you're looking for if you want to find what's on the top on the left side. And that's kind of the process. Defined it, found it, defined the locations, and so on. It appeared later that, but before I even say what it appeared later, basically this is what the results look like. You have the pictures from the 11th and 12th April, and there is this white visible object that matches what it looked like from that pixelization. So that was concluded that, well, must be it. They're within plus minus 3 meter error assumption by 6 meters in the other direction. And here is from the 5th. And basically what you have here is the 5th, 11th, 12th, and you can see that 5th, 11th, and 12th are basically the same thing, so nothing happened really drastic on that side there from that point of view. Now there's a question whether this white stain, whether that is the tree or maybe something else. And actually there was like at one point, before we had the paraglide, one of my colleagues was suggesting that it might be trash, and I kind of didn't want to be a so-called conspiracy theorist, and I said that couldn't be trash. If this is trash, that means the plane even didn't fly that way, because that trash consisted of plastic bags and various things. I mean, it would be likely burned out, and it would be for sure blown all over the creation. There's no way that you could have a trash undisturbed if the plane with a 3 engines pushing it with 80 meters per second. 80-ton plane would flew over it 5 meters above it. I mean, that's so basically we kept looking, we concluded, well, it must be the tree then. And then we thought that maybe it flew like above the tree and the blow-by kind of broke it or something. Well, whatever it was, basically it looked like it couldn't be broken at that time, so it's really either here or there. And the important conclusion is that the site didn't change between the 5th of April, which is 5 days before the tragedy, and the 11th and 12th of April, and that you have the 4 pictures kind of here to see. Well, that triggered a enormous interest and a huge reaction. It appeared really, if you think about it. Sorry, I'm going to step back a little. If you think about it, this is nothing really new. Because we already knew that this plane could not have broken that tree. It's simply a matter of physics, matter of the engineering of parameters, and Professor Binienda has proven it before. So really, this is kind of like, oh, neat, we have another way to show it. We had 5 ways before, and now we have 6th one. And well, it wasn't taken like that. It was taken as some kind of revelation. It was it triggered a huge reaction and follow-up and so on. What you see here is dozens of experiments with trees and so on, cutting branches, cutting bark, cutting different things, showing basically what we were saying that would happen. And that's this here, that even if it's frozen yet on the left bottom corner, you see, even if it's just a bark scratched and so on, you get these juices and so on. And there you have that birch tree on the top left corner. That is also split on the bottom, but it's completely dry, doesn't have anything discharging from it. In addition to it, some other analysis, quite brilliant analysis of one of the bloggers. Everybody there is anonymous. You cannot tell who's who's who, whatnot. Everybody's afraid, and they kind of just have their nicknames and whatnot. So this one is a Doratza R305 or 205, I don't remember. anyhow, did very very keen observations where he noticed that when the top were broken, if the top were broken there in the spring, the leaves would still keep on growing, which is true. And he has a bunch of experiments and showing that the trees. I mean, there's one he broke a tree in birch also in Poland, and it's shortly after still kept on growing leaves. Then he noticed on the flowers about it. Then he noticed some other things that was really amusing and right on the money. It's a very, very keen, very accurate observation that the pieces of wood that the prosecutors claimed to be embedded in that broken part of the wing were actually shavings from a saw. I mean, the fact that they would even show something like that is ridiculous. I mean, anybody who did any woodworking in their life is going to be, you know, laughing at it. It's completely ridiculous. So that's what happened. And there was a general picture there, and that location that there was an argument because right after some people refuted or claimed that it was not the birch but the garbage. I was resisting that for quite a while until a couple of crews went there and measured and so. And when they did, then the two crews came up with two different locations again. So I have 5 locations of that tree. But the last measurements are close to really getting closer every time almost. And on the left side, you have a crew that went with a Professor Chachor, who was there with Professor Wisniewski, and I don't remember the geologist that came with them, and Gerdet. And then the second one was a crew put by Misa Macierewicz, and they measured and came out to be about 6 meters away from what we determined that originally, but basically doesn't change the conclusion, doesn't change really anything, but it changes the interpretation of what is the white stain. Well, so now it's also interesting thing to look at it from the point of view of would you be able to see that white thing if it were 6 meters away from that tree, and that's in the I think northeast direction. Yeah. So here I made a model of it, given the parallax from that satellite imagery from the 5th, and so and you have there, you literally can see that you couldn't see either location of whether it's a Macierewicz crew or the other crew. You just couldn't see that thing if the tree were standing. So that's another, I don't know, maybe 6 or 7 or whatever. So now say this, like I said, it was a huge. It's like sticking a stick into an ant nest. It was a huge reaction, media, everything, and a lot of backlash and a lot of follow up and so on. A huge discussion, and that thing became like the loudest thing ever. And even though really, I mean, the implication of those results was not that tremendous. So now it's a question, are these active measures or whatnot? What happened? And we had some other earlier actions that were kind of suspicious. And there is like a Professor Witakowski got basically fired from, his contract was not extended under the excuse that he was 1 year too old already, over 70. I was 71. Because of his involvement in organizing Smolensk conference, Professor Ronda became active on TV and so on, and he said at one point, talking with a Professor Artemovich or so, he kind of used a bluff. He said that there is another report. Since Professor Artemovich was saying, oh, the report says that the plane was going below 100 meters, Professor Ronda said, well, I have another report that says that it was going below 100 meters. Which shut the other guy up, basically, and that was a very good, I think, very actually positive development, because it shows that just a faith in a Russian report is not good enough. You have to have some reasoning behind it, and you have to have some data that you can back it up and so on. But that was turned against him in a big way. The whole press and so on attacked him for lack of ethics and so on, which is a complete nonsense. It's a complete nonsense, because the type of pretending to have some kind of evidence if you know that the other person is dishonest in the arguments. It's commonly used even in the law. I mean, there is such thing. I mean, everywhere in the movies even. I mean, think about Few Good Men. I think a movie where Tom Cruise is talking to Jack Nicholson. Says there are two, whatever, Rodriguez and something, who are going in a moment say something, and so on. And so anyhow, I mean, this was a total absurd. Professor Roinda got suspended from a professorship and repressed and so on. But can you say that's active measures? Hard to say. There is a Operation Binienda. That's how Maria Schoner-Binienda called it in her other presentation, where the military prosecutors, released confidential interrogation data from Professor Binienda and a couple of other professors. Then they changed really the testimonies, then they shoved it around and so on, implying that Professor Binienda did something that he didn't, and so that's a big kind of propaganda. Professor Novacic got fired from university. His contract was terminated after 20 years of working at the University of Maryland. Yeah. And it's that active measure. Actually, I know for a fact that that was part of it. For the reason for it was that a couple of very active trolls. One is called Andrzej Pieniądzik. The other one it's I think called Pisaniecki, Paweł Pisaniecki or something. Writing, they were doing the same thing with me, writing to my university, and so on. Various slanders, saying different things. And in a result, he basically lost the job. And then Professor Artimovich from University of Toronto, is he, can you say, is he a part of that enforcement of those active measures? I mean, he's very active. He talks things on TV and so on that are completely, I mean, incredibly stupid. Not only dishonest, but outright stupid. And like, for example, he says that the tree break was typical for cutting, not for breaking, because the wind couldn't break it because the stump is too strong, the branches would be broken. That's plain idiotic. I have not heard anybody saying that kind of unreasonable things ever. On a similar subject. I don't believe that he's quite brilliant scientist in his field. He has about 50 ISI publications or Scopus and so, which is pretty high. And so serial suicider and so, are these just conspiracy theories? Intimidated pilot and so on, quitting. Fired journalists for reporting the throttle presence and so. All that is hard to say because they're isolated cases, and it's hard to say whether the society is just brainwash a bunch of people who are not able to react in some organized fashion or so to control it, or whether this is some kind of organized thing. And here, it's probably my biggest contribution to the whole thing and understanding. It's the process that was started here. This is like just a warm-up. It started with some little lies and little kind of warm-up actions against me. One was that one of the journalists was trying to eavesdrop on me and Mr. Macierewicz and a few other people discussing in the conference, and he was using a shortcut microphone to kind of filming us and listening to the conversation. And I turned towards him and I showed that, cut the camera, and I smiled to that jerk too. So they took it and they cut out that scene where I'm showing my hand in front of my throat, and they put the newspapers and TV, and so I put this big wave of attacks of Cieszewski, shocking that he cuts out the throat. Yeah. And so later,
Don't have a picture?
I couldn't get my internet going. I was going to show that picture, but everybody can find it really. If you go, then. e-compilations. They took a part of my presentation where I say something. It's like search for Pshubju or something, and they kind of manipulated that to repeat the cadre that is showing me making some noise, Pshubju, whatever. And it's a slapstick primitive that was available on the YouTube almost immediately with tens of thousands of hits, which clearly it's manipulated because only about 40, 50,000 people were watching this whole thing. And most of the presentations I had in the conference and so on, they're in a kind of range of about 40 to 50,000 or less. And this one by now has like here's what happened. Like nearly overnight, I became a public persona, and become and become a probably. I mean, this is just a kind of. Well, kind of, they have pictures here. This is in cache, so I can't update it right now. But yeah, you can see here everything manipulated and start, and you can see my picture from 40 years earlier or 30 years earlier, rather, the one on the right hand side in the bottom, and oh, Marshall picture there with the beard. And so, oh, here's. I'm smiling to that joke. You see. So anyhow, this here's the YouTube. We have 850 videos showing up overnight, and so some of them compilations, some of them. But you can see here it's 43,000, 46,000, 55,000, whatnot, and then you see here it's a top one, the Bju, Czechoslovak Bju. 700,000 hits. Yeah, but these hits are that's a counterfeiting. There's no way that many people were watching. There's no way there are that many morons in Poland that they would be excited with this, watching this thing over and so. Well, if
that goes for the whole world.
so that's a. So that started. That whole thing started with this action. Then Polsat was invited me for a TV interview, and they promised me that I would be able to show some on the computer. And a few seconds before starting the interview, we were kind of showing how I would show the laptop. I had it on my lap, so ready to show the picture. So as soon as the interview started, and by the way, I didn't know it started. I mean, the guy was all over the map, and he was so unreasonable and so unfocused, and I mean, just plain ignorant and amateur in the discussion. I thought that was some kind of warm up. We were talking like we're going to have the interview in a moment until everything finished. That interview, I mean, those who speak Polish might want to watch it. I'm not sure actually why it was so great, but it became a hit of the internet, and apparently is taught right now in the journalist schools as an example of how not to do journalist for them. So journalists basically. Basically, that was the beginning of that whole campaign, and campaign then further at the same time, Gazeta Wyborcza, which is like a queen of lies or king of lies, probably world leader in deception and dishonesty. Huh? Yeah, whatever. Yeah. So anyhow, they published a outright lie. I mean, it was actually the goal that they had even to do that was amazing, because here's an authorship here, and they looked at some submission form that I had, or that was Book of Abstracts, whatever. There was another scientist there, Mishra, by the way, assistant professor, and he was like my junior colleague basically. And they published that Czechesky lied that had this, other co-authorship in order to boost up his complete nonsense. So, and then he had a UGA intimidation. I got a letter from my dean ordering me to come back home right away, which I didn't do, but changed that identification. So here, I guess time is running out, so I just leave here the rest of the list that I was going to do. But in essence, what happened is that he had a sequence of developments that were not just a bunch of attacks and trolls, but they went into institutional, national level effort going back to over 30 years, creating multi-front action on destroying some person's credibility and so. Going accusing me of being a communist spy and from 30 years ago, and
Actually, he was my boss in the underground. He was the head of my underground group. They contacted me to tell me that did I know that he was a secret police snitch? I said, well, I know my uncle pretty well. So yes, we came back to Poland from the West when Solidarity broke out. So yeah, I didn't think he was a secret police
actually,
snitch.
this is worth maybe extending just a minute. It's actually a very important thing.
We
Marek
don't
told me.
know stuff like that.
Marek told me about that they contacted him, and I heard from somebody else. So I wrote to a journalist in Poland, and Piotr Wilgucki, Matka Kurka, one of the most probably courageous and kind of open journalists. And I wrote to him that this is what's happening, what he thinks about it, and he says, Professor Czechesky, do not ignore it. This is going to be very serious. And please do not take it easy or something. And he says, we have to immediately do something about it. I said, what do you suggest to do? And he says, well, we have to do the preemptive strike. And he says, I'm going to publish things today. And so he published, they were supposed to have this program on TV announcing that I was the communist snitch on Tuesday or something. And he published that the same night. And then the other Gazeta Polska, or whatever that was, Niezależna.pl, and w Polityce immediately followed up on that. And that program, PROS, got also expedited, and they were not quite prepared. And it went on into a turmoil through the country on that thing. And that would probably saved much of that, of the heights of that whole situation, because the power was kind of balanced out by that preemptive action, thanks to that guy, and thanks to that, Marek told me about that they were actually preparing it.
The problem was that we had researched in the course of our Kościuszko chair and Glaucopis investigation a variety of topics, including the infiltration by the secret police of student underground. So I'd seen parts of his files, parts of whatever remains of my file. I told him they misspelled my name, I was really upset. But that had been 3 years before the attack on him. So we already had things published in a scholarly publication, and I told the idiots that if they wanted to learn, they should just go and read it. Bad word, I'm sorry. I told the special people who are very evil. I'm special. Yes, special in a negative. In any event, we don't have time to interrogate Uncle Chris. He's my uncle. Yes. Thank you very much. Yeah.